All right, good morning, everybody. This is Javier Chavez here at KETIV Technologies. Model simplification refers to taking a more complex model and simplifying it, right? So if you take a look at the vessel that we're looking at here, it's basically taking it for something that feels a little bit more complex in terms of weight, the size, and we're improving performance typically, or protecting intellectual property, or converting it to a factory asset if you're using Factory Design Suite. So the first two apply to any Inventor user. The last one obviously applies more to Factory Design Suite users, which have a specialized version of Inventor. Now, when it comes to the other half of this, the asset creation, this is specifically for Factory Design Suite, and if you're not familiar with it, you'll get a little taste of it today. We'll go ahead and work with it. But Factory Design Suite is a design suite of tools, including Inventor, AutoCAD, Navisworks, and a few other tools that are specially designed to help you lay out facilities and factories and all the machinery and stuff that goes in it. So when we're doing this, the idea is to take something, a more complex piece of machinery, lay it out with other pieces of machinery, and obviously if you've ever tried to build a large assembly, this gets unwieldy. So with that said, the goal of creating our assets is to make sure that we have reusable machines or assets. It doesn't even have to be machines necessarily. We've seen companies use this for office design. So it needs to be reusable. It needs to be easily placed. So typically when we create machinery, everything has to be very precisely placed, and so we use constraints, and in some cases it takes 2 or 3, maybe sometimes 4 constraints to perfectly place our nut or bolt or component onto another adjacent component. It's also good if it can be configurable, because typically you have an asset or something you want to use on a factory floor, and they don't come in just one size. They're typically configurable, and it's something you can order out of catalog or from a manufacturer in various sizes. And obviously it needs to be factory compatible, meaning it has to behave in such a way that it accepts other factory components. And you'll see what I mean. Some of these components can actually snap together and sort of connect themselves. So those are the two halves we're going to go ahead and tackle today. And we're going to go ahead and start with the simplification process. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and switch over to Inventor here in just a moment. And just for reference, we are looking at a layout now in Factory Design Suite. You can see we have some machinery here. And if you can imagine all these conveyors, all the nuts and bolts, all the gears, all the chains in this assembly, it would probably add up to a lot of parts and make this a very unwieldy assembly. But you can see here, rotate, and it rotates fairly smooth. These are all lightweight components. Okay? And the idea is eventually to create simplified components that can simply drag and drop and land on the floor. So this is what we mean by making them factory compatible. Now, everybody can benefit from simplification, so we're going to go ahead and just start off with that portion of it here in just a sec. And as you can see, as I go to place this down, it just snaps onto the, and if I go ahead and drag on another component here, you can see they can just connect like Legos. So that's the goal here, is to create something simplified that we can reuse in Factory Design Suite. But like I said, anybody can benefit from simplified components. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a vessel here. Okay, and I'm going to show you a few ways that you can simplify your components. Right. So 50+ parts, and I can tell that at the bottom right we have a count of components, unique components in this assembly. So we definitely want to make it smaller, regardless of whether we want to use Factory Design Suite or not. And here's one of the ways we can do that. We can go to representations, and if you're not familiar with level of detail, this is one of the ways we can do this. So inside of level of detail, we can right-click there and create a new level of detail. We can suppress components manually. But if we go to new substitute, there's this Shrinkwrap option. So I'm going to use the Shrinkwrap option. And what this will do is it'll substitute the entire assembly, all 100 and something plus parts, with one part. Okay, and we can simplify that part in any number of ways. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and click on that Shrinkwrap option. Okay, It wants to use a template to create a new part. It wants me to name the new part. It wants me to place it in a folder. So I'll go ahead and take the default name here for right now, but you could actually name it anything you want. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And what I get now is a view that shows the current settings for the simplification process or Shrinkwrap process. And up at the very top, I get some options on what it's going to do. And what it's really doing is actually using the derived component tool. So if you've ever used that tool, it's just a way to create a part and derive a design from another part or assembly and choose what you want to take from that part or assembly and implement it in your current design. So in the background, that's what it's doing. Now with that said, up at the top of the dialog box, and I'll go window around this, I have some styles to choose from. Okay, and the one that's actually pushed down is all the way to the right, and it's telling me I'm going to go ahead and create a surface out of this. So you want to experiment with these and see which one creates the most lightweight version of this file. And you can always come back and change this. So in the simplification process, I have ways to simplify this and remove geometry, whether it's parts and faces. So since it's a surface right now, I can actually remove either of those or both. And so I'm going to choose to remove whole parts only. And if I move the slider over 50%, I should get rid of half my parts by visibility here. And if I click preview, I'll see some of that happen. I'll see some of those components go away. The other thing you're seeing, if I go ahead and zoom in closely, are those gold patches. So the other thing that's happening is it's patching up holes. It doesn't care if the holes are circular or rectangular. They're simply openings, and if they meet a certain perimeter guideline, we can create a range that captures, holes of a certain perimeter size. So we can filter that out, and that's basically what we would get here if we left it this way. So I'm not going to simplify it that much. In fact, I'm removing whole parts only, so I'm going to go, and I want to remove the smaller parts, and if I click preview, some of the smaller parts might come back, and I can play with that slider there until I get what I feel is reasonable here. So I got rid of some of the smaller parts, left in some of the larger ones. And again, I might want to experiment with these settings to see how big the file is. So just for reference, I'm going to go ahead and bring over a properties dialog box. I took that assembly, the assembly that we originally started with, the vessel assembly, and put everything we need for it in a folder. And it's about 11.2 megs. So every time you put this on a factory floor and you need 5 of them, 6 of them, right, you can multiply those quantities in your assembly, and that's what you're loading into memory sometimes. So the smaller this is, the better. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and put this aside here for a second. We're going to compare the size here, and if we just leave it as is, we got other settings that tell us we can include or exclude information, reduce memory mode, remove internal voids. Okay, so if there's a empty space inside that vessel, why not remove those internal voids, right? Make it solid all the way throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And so now when I go to work with this assembly, I can either work with this reduced level of detail, and you can see there's some gaps or parts here, but it still maintains the envelope, and it's much more lightweight, and it took out all the components here. Okay. Now, it's saved out to a folder, so I can reuse it as much as I want. Okay, so with that said, I mean, we basically substituted the part with, or substituted all the components on the left-hand side with this one part. And so we're going to take a quick look at it. Maybe we want to make some revisions, change the way we simplify it. I'm just going to right-click and open it. Okay, so I'm opening the part all by itself. And on the left-hand side, you can see that derived component that we were talking about. And if we want to edit what makes up that derived component, we can. But before we do, I'm going to go ahead and quickly save it and check the file size. So you can see here, compared to 11 meg, right, this is significantly smaller. Okay, and as we change some of these other settings or remove some content, it could get smaller, it could get a little bit larger, but you're going to want to play with that. This is a surface, so if you ever try to show this on a regular drawing and just document this, it might not necessarily show up right away. You might have to go through some settings to get that to show. So with that said, we can right-click, edit the derived assembly. We'll go ahead and update this here for just a sec. And in the dialog box that pops up, we were currently not seeing all these other options. We were limited to this when we were creating the shrink wrap. But now that we're in the part, we have more tabs that we can work with. Okay, and we can actually, remove some of these parts one by one if we know what they are. Okay, or like I said, we can kind of experiment here with some of these settings. Okay, so if we maintain each part as a solid body, right? It will have separate solid bodies, and we'll maintain some seams. Here's another option where it's all one body. We maintain the seams, and then the one all the way to the left is one body, and all the seams are merged. So if the seams meet on the same plane, it'll actually take out that little line where two faces meet. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to that. I don't know that I'm going to change a whole lot of options here, but if I click OK, it should update. And now we have a solid. Doesn't look at any different, so the design envelope's the same. People can tell what it is right away. But I'm going to go ahead and click and save this, and just quickly check the file size. So not a big difference on the file size, right? I get a solid as well, but again, not a big difference on the file size. So this is something I could start using right away and leveraging that way. Another option would be to use what's called the simplification tool. So again, this is a part that exists out there we could start using right away, but it does maintain a link to the original assembly. So when I right-click on that derived assembly, just underneath Edit, I could choose to break the link. Okay, and if I break the link, that's a very permanent thing. There is no tie back to the assembly, and it'll never bark at me and ask me for the rest of the assembly. But it does have a connection to the assembly. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to come back to the assembly here, and I'm going to close this. And I'm going to show you another way we can simplify this. I'm going to get this back to the master. Let's go ahead and save this level of detail. Okay, everything's back. All 100-something parts are back. And another option for you is to go to this Simplify tool. Okay, so in 2014 they added the Simplify tab. Not a lot of people using this. Not a lot of people asking questions about this, and I have to assume that they're not using it, right? So you're going to do this, or you're going to work through this tool just like you would the ribbon, left to right. First thing you want to do is you want to start including components. So in this simplified version of this assembly, what's going to stay? Okay. Before I start picking anything, I want to go ahead and point your attention to the left-hand side, and under the view representation, we're going to get a new view created here in just a moment. Okay, and it's going to be a simplified view. So what do I want to include or keep here? So a tool pops up and lets me choose how I want to select components that are going to stay or get removed. Part priority, component priority, parent priority. It also chooses here all occurrences. So if you have multiple parts that are exactly the same, like these handles here, if I choose one, it'll assume that we want to keep all of those. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and pick the handles, and it basically picked all of them, right? So I'll go ahead and deselect those, right? And I'm going to tell it what I want to keep. So I definitely want to keep the cylinder, right? I'll keep these legs, and I'm on a part priority. Let's see what happens when I choose component priority. So if there's a subassembly here, it'll be the entire subassembly. So that's a subassembly. That will all be kept. This will all be kept. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep the dome here. Okay. I'm going to choose to select all occurrences here of the legs and maybe the little foot pedestals. Okay. All right. Let's also keep. I'm going to go back to part priority. the dome here. And I think we are good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you'll notice that it took out quite a few components, obviously, simplified, but it's just basically turning off components. So I want to do a little bit more here. I don't want some of these gaps, and I don't want multiple parts. I eventually want this to be just one part. And I also want to remove some of the fillets and chamfered edges, some of those details. So the next step here, I just went from include components to define envelopes. And so we're going to go ahead and go to the define envelopes button. And what this tool does is it takes an existing object and simplifies it to either a rectangular bounding box or cylindrical bounding box. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this one, right? So this object, obviously I don't want to make it a box, so I'm going to hit escape here for just a sec and kind of restart that. I'm going to switch first to bounding cylinder. And so now when I pick this, what it does is it tries to resize that cylinder to the outermost boundaries, right? And I can kind of take over and override that. So, I want this to be as big as the dome, so I can go ahead and pull on the handle, and I could either just dynamically size it to be, about to the top there, or about to the top here, or I could also snap. So if I take this handle here, there is an option to snap to a surface, and I can go ahead and snap to the cylindrical surface, and it's exactly that diameter. Okay. So I'm going to go apply that, and it's basically substituting all that with a big cylinder. Okay, and so I'm going to do the same thing here with this cylinder, and I'm going to go ahead and substitute that there, and right away it looks like it got it about the right size. So that all is the envelope that contains that part of the component there. I'll apply that, and obviously I can do the same with a rectangular object. And snap it to the bottom here. Okay, and since I also told it to pick up all the occurrences, it did it for all three of those. So last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and replace that tube that has some inner walls and a thickness with just a solid cylinder. So all that's getting replaced. And I suppose I could probably take this and replace it with a cylinder as well. Just make sure that it encompasses the entire manway there. Okay, so with that said, I've got this object that basically encompasses that whole envelope. And at any time, if I want to come back and start editing what's there, you'll notice it created this simple view representation. It added envelopes here, so we can always edit these. And if I right-click on this simple view, I could choose Edit Include Components and decide what to include or exclude. And I also have a filter here where I can just view what's been included, right, or view what was excluded, and choose to decide to add those in or not. So here, I don't need this object, so I could take it out possibly and remove it now. Okay, one less object in there. So with that said, I have a very simplified representation of this. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this pipe. Right, so you're going to determine what's important to keep and what's not. Okay, and then the last thing we can do here, and it's all optional, but I can go ahead and create a simplified part. This is the same thing as what we saw earlier, where we create a substitute part. Okay, and so I'm just going to call this simple here. I can create it wherever I want, use whatever template I want, and place it where I want. So I've got options here. No surface modeling options. This is all going to be solids. And if I click OK, I've got a new simplified part for this vessel. Okay. Now, to make this a little bit more lightweight, you'll see that the derived component, it is using a derived component, is embedded in here. I'll take a quick look at what size this file is, and I haven't saved it yet, so let's go ahead and save. All right, and let's see how big it is. Okay, tiny, much smaller than either of the sizes we saw there. Of course, it's super simplified here, but that's okay. That's what we want. And just to make it a little bit smaller, this does make reference back to the assembly. Okay, now that I've created all these solids here around this, you can see extrusion 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just like creating a normal part. I can right-click just to make this smaller and delete the original assembly that was kind of embedded in there. And again, if I save this, this should become even smaller and less dependent on other files. So just a little bit smaller there. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and save this. Okay, and if I ever intend to use this, if I ever intend to use this on the factory floor and drag and drop it like we did some of those other files, then I need to publish it that way. I need to turn this into an asset. So we're going to create a real simple, I don't want to say a dumb asset, but less intelligent asset that I can just reuse over and over again. Maybe I buy this from a manufacturer and it's ready to go. I'm going to go to the Factory tab. And on the Factory tab, I can immediately take this into an asset building environment. So as soon as I do this, since I'm going to use it with Factory, and again, this Factory tab and this Asset Builder tool are unique to Factory Design Suite, since I'm going to use it, it wants to know, okay, how is it going to land on the floor? Is anything going to connect to it? Are there some other pieces of information that are unique to Factory Design Suite that we're going to use? So I'm going to do this one real quick and then go ahead and maybe do one more that's a little bit more intelligent. So the most important part of this is setting a landing surface. You can see the landing surface now. It's right in the middle of the vessel. So I'm going to choose a landing surface first. I want it to land on its feet here. So that is the landing surface. It's always going to land on its feet. You can choose an insertion point because this does create an AutoCAD block for Factory Design Suite as well. Okay. If for some reason you create an asset that's actually elevated off the floor, you can offset it off the floor however many feet or millimeters you want. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. That is the landing surface. Okay. And again, we can go to this asset builder within any part in Factory Design Suite. Okay. And so let's go and do a little bit more here. Asset properties. So this is information we can embed in here, and we can go to the project tab, and if this has got a certain part number that you order it from your manufacturer, or maybe internally a large main assembly number, we could also create layers here. These are the same layers that work with AutoCAD. So if you want this to show up on a vessel layer, you can create the layer here. And that information gets published not just to Factory Design Suite in Inventor, but also Factory Design Suite AutoCAD. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that part. And I'll go ahead and publish the asset. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save this. Like I said, the most important part of this is creating that landing surface so it behaves just like all those other components. So it is going to create a 3D version of this and a 2D version of this, both. So with that said, I get to choose my user assets folder. I'm going to keep the same name. And there are different asset types. So this is just a standard part, but you can create a pit. In other words, a sunken-in portion of the concrete. That happens a lot within factory floors. Or a platform, an elevated portion of concrete that sits on top of the factory floor. So that's going to go ahead and write. We're going to go ahead and switch that over to one of the assemblies, and we'll see that we can just drag and drop it onto a factory floor. Okay, so let's take a look at this particular floor. We were working with this a little bit earlier, and we saw that drag and drop functionality. And this is our asset browser in Factory Design Suite. So this is where some of that information comes from. It comes with a library of existing common assets like belts and conveyors, stuff like that. So if I go to user assets, I think we'll find my vessel. All right? And you can see the vessel here simply lands on the floor. Okay, and it's a very simple part to use. And so we'll take a look at this here in just a sec and make a something more intelligent, kind of like these belts here. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to something I modeled. This is a simplified version of a conveyor, configurable, something that can change length. You probably won't be able to use those simplification tools. Instead, you're going to create the conveyor in a single part all by itself. You can work with assemblies, a little bit more complicated. Okay? So some things about the conveyor. Right? If I take a look at FX parameters, we've created parameters here, length, height, width, leg width, they're all configurable. So if I change this, from a length of 75 to 96, right, and I hit apply, you probably saw it update in the background, but it got longer. So I'll go ahead and change this, and it gets shorter. So it controls it. There's also a parameter that is now controlled by a drop-down list. So we're going to limit users to these widths, but let them create lengths that are infinite, right? And heights that are infinite. So we can lower this and raise it up. Okay. The key to using this is making sure that these are marked as keys. So by default, when we go to publish this as an asset, they will get used as keys. So again, we're going to create an asset. We're going to choose the Asset Builder tool. Okay, doesn't know which way is up. You can see the floor. It thinks it's sideways. We're going to create a landing surface. Okay, and that's going to be how it's going to land, right side up. Okay, so the next step for us, we want it to be a little bit more intelligent, connect to other conveyors and adjust lengths and things like that. So we can define these connectors, and you can see we've modeled a work point where it's at the middle of the component, right at the very edge, and so they're going to snap to each other at that point. So with that said, if we use the Define Connector tool, we're going to go ahead and we'll define it here. The key here is having the arrow point away from the part. So if I right-click on the arrow, or if I click on the arrow, I can go ahead and make it perpendicular to a face. Okay, and the blue needs to point in the up direction. In fact, it tells you if you hover over it. And we can go ahead and flip the axis. That's one way to do it. Or we can click on it and make it perpendicular to a surface. We'll flip it one more time. So that's right side up, right? Always points away, and again, blue arrow points up. And we can click OK. We've got a connector there. And we need one on the other end. So same thing here, point at the right direction, point at the right direction, we're good to go, there's a connector. Okay. All right, if we take a look at parameters, okay, they look like they're ready to go. We're going to go ahead and publish the asset. Again, we can look at asset properties, give it names here, but we're going to go ahead and publish this. Go ahead and save that. And we'll go ahead and put it in that same user assets folder, and I'll put the word KETIV at the end of this. Okay. So by the time this is done publishing, we will have a configurable, reusable belt here. All right. So we can drag and drop this. Lands right side up like we'd expect it to. You can see the green dots there. And I'm going to right click and choose Done and add another one. You can see they just connect. And they connect. Okay. Now when I go to look at this, if you remember we had some parameters that we said were configurable there. So if we take a look at, if I click on this and I take a look at the factory properties, I can see the width, 36 inches, and when I click away, it wants to reconfigure that and make it wider. It'll also make the lengths longer as well, but they're all connected. So let's go ahead and change this to 100. I'll hit enter. Right, and you saw it make it longer, and we'll go ahead and make it 36 inches. Tell it to update. It made it wider. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and jump back. We just made some assets here, some simplified components as well. Right? We use level of detail. We use the simplify tool. And somewhere in there, we're actually using the drive component tool. So I didn't list that in there, but that's what's going on in the background. And when it came to assets, we did two parts of this. We authored it so that it would work. We told it, which side was up. We also decided where connectors were going to be, and we added properties to those assets. And we published it. And as soon as we publish it, we make it available to we can make it available to all other users, so we can share that same asset and use it over and over and over again. Okay. So with that said, I just want to make a quick announcement before we go to Q&A, and I wanted to make sure that you guys are aware. Next week is going to be the dynamic simulation session. Okay, so watch for that. Watch for some of the upcoming Vault and Fusion work sessions as well for AVA, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So I'm not sure what questions came in, but I'm going to take a quick look here.
Yeah, I fielded a couple here. There is another one I thought would be good to show or to have in front of everybody, and that was, is the factory suite included in the Autodesk Inventor Professional Suite, or is it an additional packet?
Got it. Okay. So excellent question. So Factory Design Suite is a separate suite from Product Design Suite. So you either have one or the other, and they both include Inventor. They both include AutoCAD. But Factory Design Suite also includes these add-on tools to help you lay out these factories or facilities. So it is a separate suite, and I don't know if it's considered an upgrade from Product Design Suite or if they're at the same level. But if that's something you're interested in doing, make sure you contact us, and we can help you choose the right path to get to Factory Design Suite if that's something you're going to do.
And just to add to that too, just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that the simplification stuff that Javier went over is available in just standard Inventor and professional Inventor as well.
That's correct. So the simplification tools are in basic Inventor. Everybody who has Inventor has it, has access to it. It's the asset creation and dropping on the floor and connecting that way that's unique to Factory Design Suite. Okay, excellent, guys. So I hope you guys learned something. You got something new out of this. I would think the simplification tool would be fairly new to you guys. But with that said, I want to go ahead and thank you, and I'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thanks again.